focused on the Israel-Zionism overlap conversation. As you guys know well, that we've discussed this for a very long time. During the COVID-19 conversation, that took a lot of our focus. And so I thought it was very important to reach out to Adam, to have him come back on the show to discuss some of these deeper points that many are just simply terrified to talk about. As we've covered well on this show, and Adam has as well, the weaponization of anti-Semitism to suppress very important and provable topics. So today we'll get into three main things and go many other topics. We'll see where we end up. We want to talk about the prophecies, the Al-Aqsa overlap, the third temple, the red heifer conversation that even corporate media has covered, which I'm very interested to see what Adam thinks about that. I want to talk about the overlap of Zionism, Judaism, the history of this, and also end with an interesting point around other criticisms that Adam's work has been highlighting in regard to other Abrahamic religions. And as you guys know, I'm a Christian, but I think it's important that we are objective and always willing to probe these different investigations and see where they lead and find, the truth as we may from any number of things, even if it challenges stuff that we believe. So Adam, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, brother. Thanks for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing well, Ryan. It's good to be back on TLAV. It's been a while, and
long while.
Happy to talk with you. I see with your sticker right there in the front, question everything. I would hope that people would be willing to question Christianity and Jesus also.
Well, what's funny is, as a starting point, this is something I've taken a lot of heat for over the years from very, the obvious crowd you would expect. I have a lot of Christians in the audience that, and be clear, like I'm very anti-organized religion. I don't go to church because I just don't believe in that kind of concept. I've been very clear about this in the past, but I very deeply believe in what I believe. And what's interesting though is that some people find contradictory, right? So if I'm saying question everything, people will throw that in my face in the past and be like, what about, your religion? I said, well, that too. And then they immediately think that's like a gotcha moment. It's like, well, let me explain. Like, my point is belief, faith, and journalism, in my opinion, this is why I have such a hard time taking seriously people that fold in their religion to their journalism, because it's inherently contradictory. You're talking about something that's based on faith and belief, and then you're talking about provable evidence and facts. And those things often overlap, which we'll probably get into in the Christ is King kind of overlap conversation. And I find that to be hard to take seriously, And so my point was, I believe these things very deeply from faith perspective, but then I can also stand back and go like, could I be wrong? Of course I could. Could I be missing something? Of course I could. But then I still fall back in my belief that that's how I feel. As that, I think most honest Christians are like, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me because it is based on faith. So it's a good, interesting starting point, because it's so frustrating to see how much of that in the two-party paradigm is just shoved in your faces, and it's more than ever today, So we can start there if you'd like, but I feel like it's a better thing to kind of end with in the overlap of both of them. But I kind of wanted to start wherever you'd like, but I wanted to start with the prophecies of all of this, because the average person right now who has never even considered the problems of Zionism, the issue of Israel, and all these deeper topics, this is something that they're being confronted with and they're confused by, because even corporate media, and I'll play the clip in a second, have rolled this out. And so it's something that you've talked about for a long time. It's suddenly now being like, yes, it's real. How does that fold into it? And so I'd like to break that down for the average person who's trying to make sense of this without knowing all of the deeper dynamics. So in regard to the prophecy, so start wherever you'd like.
So the prophecies really is like the key word and the key issue, because all of Judaism, all of Messianic Judaism, all of Christianity, it's all predicated on the prophecies of the nation of priests. Yahweh is the God of Israel and Zion's chosen people. That's the whole thing. So the prophecies really is just Judaism and their interpretation of Judaism. And then there's Christian prophecy and Islamic prophecy that both kind of converge and are built upon the Judeo prophecies being fulfilled. So basically the prophecies are that, well, to talk about the prophecies, you have to talk about like the overall agenda in Judaism, in the Torah. And it's the jealous God of Israel is monotheistic. He wants to, conquer all of the other nations, eradicate their idols, their gods, their traditions, and then have them worship in like fear and trembling and on their knees, licking the dust, the God of Israel. And they're supposed to do that through the light into the nations, Isaiah 42 and 49. It talks about the light to the nations, and those are both interpreted as messianic. And that's what the Moshiach and the chosen people are to do, is that's their destiny, the light to the nations, to bring the nations to worship the God of Israel. That's Judaism in a nutshell.
And to clarify, you're talking about scripture, or are these prophecies around scripture? And just so the audience knowing, that's what you're citing. These aren't just your opinions. These are coming from cited scriptures and prophecies. So which is it? Is it scripture?
This is from watching
prophecy, or
thousands
both?
of hours of rabbis, from what the Hebrew Torah text says. It's not even controversial. You could see, I could show you 100 clips of rabbis saying, what are we chosen for? We're the light to the Gentiles, to heal the world, to kun olam, and bring morality and monotheism to the world. And their end goal really is to have all of the sons of Noah, the Noahides of the world, all of the non-Jewish world, to be Noahides and acknowledge the God of Israel as the one true God. That's the ultimate agenda. And top rabbis, even 1,000 years ago, Maimonides, known as the Rambam, said that Christianity and Islam are both like preparing the way and God's divine plan to prepare the world for the Messiah. Because both Christianity and Islam are now awaiting the Torah prophesied Messiah to return. And and also the rabbis are chanting, Chabad rabbis are chanting, we want Moshiach now. And the Christians are chanting, Christ is king, and we need the second coming, or the second coming is going to happen. And that's where I'll segue into the red heifer and what's going on with the third temple and stuff I've been talking about. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, before you jump into that, I would say that, interestingly enough, it is obviously very contentious. Your point is it shouldn't be, because it's public information. That's one of the interesting things people are grappling with right now in all of this, is that there's a lot of very easily provable information out there that is still contentious because there's a very large political and religious push to make it so. I think that's an interesting point, because you're right. It shouldn't be if you can clearly show it happening, But so what I was asking before, though, before we go past that, now you were describing there, are those direct scripture, or are those prophecies around scripture coming from these rabbis?
Well, they're both, but not all of the scripture is like wildly interpreted. It's pretty straightforward things that they unanimously or consensus have a majority belief in. Because obviously not every Jew agrees on everything in the Torah, but a lot of things they do agree on.
And that was the other two things I wanted to ask before we jump into that, is, so when you're discussing this, you're of the mind that, how, in your opinion, let's put it that way, how much of the Jewish world population believes in this stuff? Because I know there's a lot of Christians that are still Christians that don't necessarily believe in some of the more, just extreme, I guess. In any case, it would be extreme in my opinion too. Some of the stuff that people take it verbatim. And then the second part would be, in your opinion, is this a Zionist, Sabbateanism kind of conversation influencing this, or do you feel this is just Judaism as a whole?
Sabbatean Frankism is just a manifestation of Judaism and Kabbalah. So they were just trying to, like, when people say like, oh, Zionism started with Theodor Herzl and it was secular. No, Zabbatai Zevi was a Zionist movement back in the 1600s. And then in the 1700s, there were top Kabbalists that were talking about resettling the land and hastening the coming of their Messiah and rebuilding the temple, like, long before Theodor Herzl. So the prophecies of the end times, which is like the consensus view of the Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, even conservative and some Reform sects, is that they want to have the red heifers right now. They have to be perfectly red, according to a verse in Judges, so they can burn it to ashes, mix the ashes with water and a couple other random things, like some witchcraft cocktail. There they are, yeah, with Cassie Dillon from the Daily Wire.
We can talk about that next. I just want to show the picture. Go ahead.
We need to free the hostages. So they need to burn that up, burnt offering, to ashes, so they can mix it with water, purify the priests, purify the Temple Mount area so that it's pure, and they can now rebuild the temple. And obviously
these are stated publicly, by the way, for those listening. And most people are seeing this now. This is, I'll show you her tweet, and she's explaining this, and I'll give you something to laugh at in a second about the semantics about whether it's a sacrifice versus a purification when you're ultimately killing the animal on an altar. So we'll get to that in a second, but go ahead, please continue.
Yeah, no, she doesn't even, it's not a sacrifice, Cassie Dillon says.
I'll show it.
It's a ritual.
Yeah. Well, not even that. Like, what she ultimately tries to break down here is, like she first of all, she says very, like, this fact check. No, there will not be plans to sacrifice. And, but down here she goes to be precise. The red heifer isn't technically a sacrifice. It's slaughtered and burned on the Mount of Olives on an altar, but not on an altar, except it totally is based on the this whole breakdown here.
A massive altar already awaits.
You know, it's just kind of hilarious. This semantics game trying to like hide the extreme nature of what it is. It's an animal sacrifice in 2024. I think that's the part that a lot of people are like, that doesn't seem right. You know, in a very basic sense.
Right. And so they believe that needs to be done in order to build the third temple. And in order to do that, they have to, they have to destroy the Dome of the Rock and maybe even Al-Aqsa Mosque too, or move it. There's been talk about moving it to Mecca with some normalization with Saudi Arabia down the line. But there's a couple key things in Judaism about the end times. It's the temple, it's the end times Gog and Magog war, and it's the destruction of Edom, which they interpret as Western civilization and like all the Roman Catholic Church countries. All of Christendom and Western civilization is Edom. It's very important. Their end times prophecies of Edom. I have a pinned video. It's a 10-minute compilation of rabbis all talking about the destruction of Edom, which they view as Western civilization. And it's pinned on my channel, on my Twitter. It's got like 1.5 million views, 4.4 thousand likes. And that talks all about that. Nothing that I'm making up here. I've been going over all the primary documents and sources that cover this, and hours and hours of rabbis saying it.
That's one thing that I've always pointed out about your work in general, despite whether people may disagree with conclusions, that I've never seen something you will cite things that you can prove based on, you know, videos people have put out, scripture, documentation in the past. You know, it's for a lot of people, it is the like this is what I was asking before, and since we have a pause, that in general, all of this is very important. All of it's very real. Do you believe that this is a majority of the Jewish religion in the world? Do you think, you know, in your opinion, because I don't, no one can really know that for sure, I would argue, but I see a lot of pushback coming from prominent Orthodox Jewish groups, in some cases, against even the prophecy side of this. And so what do you think in regard to, is this a majority? Is this a political manipulation of some of the Jewish population, or do you think it's just a Jewish religion problem? Like people could argue about Christian people having similar thoughts. Like I don't think that's the case. I was curious what you think in your research, because you've done a lot more than I have on this topic.
Well, it's not all, but it is like the consensus between conservative, Orthodox, ultra Orthodox, like Chabad Lubavitch. That's the most, bar none, the most influential religious Jewish group in the world. And there is Nutra Carta and some Hasidic Jews that are anti-Zionist, quote unquote anti-Zionist, like right now, but they're a really vocal fringe minority and like not taken seriously and, you know, viewed as heretics by the regular Jewish rabbinical community. And their prophecies are just like slightly different. They think the Messiah needs to come first, and then they will go back and live in the land and fulfill all the prophecies. And Zionism, a lot of people talk about Zionism, and Zionism is Judaism and Christianity. It's, in my view, it's like anybody that believes in the concept of Zion and the God of Zion, and that's what all of the return to Israel is predicated upon, the return to the Holy Land, the prophecy fulfillment. They're praying 3 times a day for rebuilding the third temple, and their saddest day of the year is when they mourn the destruction of the 2 temples. Tisha B'Av would happen on the same day, supposedly. So it's always all of Judaism. There would be no Zionism without Judaism. Zionism is just like another name for Judaism. You could say that all of the foundations of Judaism are just all Torah. It's Torah Judaism. The chosen people, the prophecies, the Messiah, all these things. So they want an end times war, Gog and Magog. It's also called the War of the Sons of Light and Sons of Darkness, which was called the War Scroll found at the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is pre-Christian, like 100 to 200 BC. And the Temple Institute, Sanhedrin organization, in 2020 minted a coin with Trump and Netanyahu called the War of the Sons of Light and Sons of Darkness. Minted this coin, the same group that did the Trump Third Temple coin and the Trump Cyrus coin. And the Gaza Israel conflict starts, and Netanyahu and Gallant, the head of the IDF spokesman, are all saying this is the war against the sons of darkness.
Right.
So Israel's cabinet, Netanyahu, is the most religiously Zionist, extreme that like they've ever had. We got the clip of the ex-prime minister Ehud Barak saying Netanyahu is influenced by his political partners to go into escalation of the war so he can hold on to power and accelerate the coming of the Jewish Messiah. This is the former prime minister, Ehud Barak.
And so do you believe that they are fully of the mind? 'Cause I know like there are differences like there are levels of extremism between the Netanyahu right and the far extreme, more right of the religious Zionism party of the coalition, right? So do you
A lot
think
of
they
people
all
think
fully
don't like
believe all
Netanyahu
this,
because
or-
he's not like radical enough, actually.
Exactly. So do you think that they all have the same belief in this, or that some of them are more playing it from a political side? Because I hear that Netanyahu is actually largely more terrified of the right side of the argument than the left, more so. Like that they're driving him based on that belief. But that could be just propaganda talking points. But what do you think based on your research of them and their belief?
Well, a Chabadnik billionaire diamond tycoon helped fund Netanyahu into office. There's an article, I think it's Jerusalem Post, says the rabbi that crowned Netanyahu, he was told to go to, I think it was Australia, to mine diamonds by the Rebbe, the head of Chabad Lubavitch himself. And it's never all of them, it's not never all of them, but I mean, it is a huge influential sector. And Netanyahu, there's a clips you've probably seen, many people have seen, of Netanyahu early in his political career going and meeting with the Rebbe at Chabad and him saying, you need to do more to hasten the Moshiach, the Messiah. And he goes, I will. And they seem very, the Rebbe's been very close with a lot of the prime ministers and top generals and stuff, giving them, advice. And it's this war. Netanyahu's been pushing for the war on terror, the war of Christianity versus Islam. This is the end times clash of civilizations, Gog and Magog, the East versus the West, Ishmael versus Esau, which is the Muslims versus the Christians. That's how they say it. Esau and Ishmael are the two firstborn, like unchosen sons in the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob patriarchy.
Okay, interesting. So is this how you would? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. And one last point about the Gog and Magog war. It's been interpreted for a long time by rabbis and Christian Zionists that it's Iran and Russia versus the rest of the world. Their Gog, and then in the end, it's Edom, Western civilization is destroyed. And they mutually destroy each other. And then that's the Messianic age where everybody realizes that their religions were not right, and then they grab a hold of the tassel of the Jew and say, we heard God is with you. And basically, the elder shall serve the younger. Esau, the elder brother, shall serve his twin brother Jacob. That's the prophecy. And that's the Noahides. We will serve them, recognize they were chosen. I'm not saying this is like, this is what they want. This is what they say. I'm not saying necessarily it's all going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and this is where I think it's important. And even if it's, in your opinion, a very small minority of all Jews in the world, I still think it's monumentally important that we make that clear, that this is extreme portions of these beliefs that are driving this. And it's a prophecy side of it, whereas opposed, like you could argue, I'm sure there's somebody out there that does not believe in these prophecies, but still believes in the religious text. I'm sure that exists somewhere, right? So I just think it's important to make clear, whatever we disagree on, like the majority or not, I think you already said more than once. It's not
that's
every
something
single
that
person.
I always get. This is an important point because I always get this. I'll do these compilations. I do lots of epic rabbi compilations with all these different rabbis all over YouTube and the internet saying the same things, the same prophecies, right? And I'll put together these whole hour-long videos with music and stuff. And people will come in and they go, those aren't real rabbis. Those are just fringe cherry-pick people. But really, this is like a large portion of all the people that we're watching. And to show that it's this many people believing it and saying it, and they're citing their sources from the Torah of where they're getting it from, and it makes sense. Like they're really, people come in the comments and reply and are running cover instead of disavowing this fanatical,
which is part of it.
zealot end time stuff. They say those aren't real rabbis, just like the excuse you'll get with Christians too. Those aren't real Christians. Don't worry about the Christian Zionists. Right. And that's the other point. So where the Christians play into this now, there's a lot of Christians that believe that Jesus won't return until the Antichrist reigns, and there's the mark of the beast, and he's like ruling in the temple. So like this cattle rancher from Texas that bred these red heifers and sent them to Israel, he wants to help the end times prophecies of Judaism be fulfilled because them having the heifer and rebuilding the temple and having these wars and anointing their Messiah, the Christians say that's the Antichrist and that Jesus is going to come and destroy them. So in Christian prophecies, they need all of the Jewish prophecies to be fulfilled, so for their prophecies to be fulfilled. So it's like predictive programming. Their belief in these prophecies is like manifesting this into existence. And they're trying, a lot of them are trying to manifest it as well.
Interesting. And so it's the same kind of point. Then you could argue that, like, as a Christian, and for example, like, I can believe in all these texts and read the Bible and, you know, and tangential texts as well, but not necessarily believe in the religious beliefs or prophecies around that by some of the other Christians in the world, you know? So it's the same kind of point. And I think that that's an interesting dynamic to include in that, is that, like, here's a great example. Like, I've often pointed out the work in the past, like Abby Martin, for example, that has shown without question that the majority of people in Israel have a wildly racist and anti-Palestinian perspective. There's just, it's not racist to acknowledge that you can clearly prove that, right? However, and I think it's a growing sentiment more today than ever, that you can see that there's groups, and I'll never argue it's even close to the majority, but that there are groups that aren't small by any sense that push back against that, right? And whether these are the Torah Judaism groups that you would, and you made a fair point to say that it may just be that they're, I mean, I would even point this out in like foreign policy examples, that maybe they're just trying to take advantage of a moment where they could win some support. That's always possible too. My point, though, is that you can see that there are some that do not think that. And then we also have to compare that with, like, just taking like an American mindset that I use to kind of balance that with, like, from like a pro-war perspective, right? That I can clearly prove that far too many, most likely the vast majority of Americans, are blindly pro whatever kind of current direction we're being aimed at for the war sense, right? But that doesn't mean that I think that if broken down, if they fully understood all the dynamics, that they might believe that still. That's all I'm saying. I mean, clearly you can tell this is an important point to me. I know that this is something that you get constantly thrown at in this regard. And your research is pretty clear, but I just want to be caution. I want to caution people that it's important for me, as I've said in any discussion, that we make sure we acknowledge that it's not an entirety of the conversation. And I almost say this because I think your work gets attacked under that being some kind of assumption, even though you make it clear that's not the case, right? Because people will broad stroke your work as saying all Jews are one way. And you've made it clear more than once that's not what you feel. So I think that's very important, right? So if you've got a comment on that, go ahead. And that I'd like to jump into the other patches and prophecies around the temple. Go ahead.
Sure. A lot of times, or not, I shouldn't say a lot of times, like very rarely I'll get a comment and they'll say, well, some Jews disagree. I'll do a whole compilation of rabbis saying something. They'll go, well, some rabbis disavow. Not everybody agrees with that. And I acknowledge that, but that doesn't change the fact that still like a large portion does, and they are influential. Like Chabad Lubavitch was just listed on the 50 most influential Jews of Jerusalem Post, the only religious organization on the list. And
that's important. Yeah, I don't think anybody can disagree with that today. I think it's very clear that this is I'm just really glad today. And, I would argue it's a Zionist focus for me, but your work is going to probably broaden this out for me. But the idea that it's obvious to people now, whether they're focusing on the Zionist Judaism overlap or just Zionism, or however they look at it, that this is an interesting problem that's much bigger than people have given it credit for, right? I think that's a really important thing that people are, for the first time in their lives, recognizing. And I think that's what's drawn attention to some of your older work that's been highlighting that.
Well, just think of the influence that the Abrahamic religions have had over the last 2,000 years. 1,700 years, it's really completely dominated civilization in half the world. And what I kind of disagree with, I get upset with, is when I see people all the time saying Zionism is not Judaism. And that's kind of like implying that, like, there's nothing wrong with Judaism. But if you just like read what the Torah says, like, there's a lot of stuff that's very problematic.
Couldn't you say the same thing about Christianity, though?
Absolutely. Christianity is the extension of Judaism. It's the conquering arm, Judaism for Gentiles. Absolutely.
Right. So I guess my point in saying that is ultimately you could make an argument about any ultimate religion that has extreme levels of it if you really take everything at face value, whether it's the Quran or the Bible or any of them, right? But I don't think that most average people within these religions truly adopt some of these more extreme ideas. I could be wrong in that, but I think that what I'm starting to see more and more is that this is, like, for instance, your point about the rabbis. I agree. And I mean, this is some of the most wild things I've seen so far. Like rabbis, which again, this would be contentious to some people. They probably say we're lying about it, but there's a million videos of rabbis saying that they can rape or abuse or kill children if they're not Jewish. And that makes me sick, right? But I don't believe that every Jew actually believes that. Even though, like, I've got plenty of pastors out there that say things that not my pastors, but that I've been aware of that say things that I think are way too extreme, way ridiculous, but I'm still a Christian. That, see what I'm saying? So that's kind of where I leave that undefined line, is that I don't think we know for sure exactly what the full belief is, because what we get presented with constantly is the really full picture of, really what Israel wants us to believe is what the picture is. You see what I'm saying? And I do think a part of it is that what you're saying. But for all I know, you're completely right. I just am being very cautious and objective with that broad stroke point that I was making clear before,
Yeah, well, I said numerous times, obviously, it goes without saying that not all Jews agree on everything in Judaism. But even if it's like the 80-20 rule and it's only 20, even though I think it's actually higher than that in believing, practicing in Judaism. But this is what I always get. It's the no true Scotsman fallacy, where whatever Christian I'll show, all the other Christians will say, well, that's not real Christianity. That's not, the Pope's not real Christianity. Pope's not a real Christian. You'll get that all the time too. So it's like you can never criticize the actual thing because it's always dismissed as, oh, well, that's not really it, Right. And they do that to me with rabbis. They do that to me with Christianity. That's the defense that they both use.
What I would argue with the Zionism is not Judaism point, and I'm sure people have their own opinions about when they write that. For me, it's about trying to establish that it's not, like, I've made it clear that they're clearly connected. Like, there's no way you can pretend they're not very clearly interconnected right now, but that they're not, it's Judaism, it's not the exact same thing, right? Even if you want to argue that Zionism is an extension of Judaism, it's not that it is the same thing, that there's differences. I think that's all, at least what I'm trying to say when I write that.
What percentage of religious Jews do you believe are also Zionist?
It's a great question. I don't know, and I've been trying to
probably like high 90s.
You think? I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I would argue it's probably somewhere up there, but what I'm starting to see more and more is that there are groups that are given not enough attention, enough attention in regard to their resistance of that. So I just keep it open.
I think actually they're given a ton of attention for how,
you think?
For how much influence they actually have in their community. They're complete outcasts and not taken seriously at all, and they really are fringe. And what do you think is the difference between Judaism and Zionism?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think for me, if what my research has shown, and this is one of the reasons, again, while I'm trying to broaden this out into the much further than just the origins of Zionism, like the allegations of Herzl being an atheist and so on, like going, as you're pointing out, much further than that, is that I'm beginning to see that it's a political organization that, in my opinion, has been using Judaism. But to your point, though, if you roll in what you're talking about, it's more so that it's kind of a give and take, right? Where you have a history behind it. But I guess my real question would come down to is whether I think that let's just take the religious Zionism party out of the current coalition, if they truly embody what other Jews believe, or even specifically other Zionists. But I argue Zionism is a problematic thing at its core. And that's what I wouldn't say that about Judaism, right? And I think that's my differentiation there. And to be honest, we don't have to keep diving. If you want to, and we could talk about this the entire time, but I think it's clear that, we might end up not on the same page with this one point, but I think it's more important that I allow you to flesh out what you think for the rest of the audience. But my audience has heard me talk about this endlessly, so we can talk about it forever, but please, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
You said that Zionism is a political system using religion.
Or it's a political organization that is using Judaism, is the way I'd put it.
Political organization. Okay. I think all of Judaism, all of Christianity, all of Abrahamism are influencing politics. It's influencing people. It's what they're doing is using religion. And this is what I see Christianity, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's mind control. It's religious brainwashing. It's controlling people.
Would you differentiate organized religion from just, an act like somebody who feels like they're born as a Christian and kind of practices, but not like, would you differentiate those two things?
Well, unorganized Christianity isn't really organized and doing anything in history. It's always been the church. It's always been the authority. It's been the kings and queens, using the religion, the priests, and it's all about the prophecy deception, right? The whole concept is that the nation of priests, they're God's chosen people. They have the power of prophecy. They can predict the future. That's how God shows his power, is he tells them things and then they happen, right? That's the whole thing. All of Christianity, all of the Messiah is, all of Jesus is all based on fulfilling prophecy. And that's actually, it's a mythical fake prophecy fulfillment. That's the con. all Christians believe that the Jews have a covenant with God. They're the prophets of God, and they prophesied the Messiah, and that Messiah was meant to have dominion over the nations. That's what it says in Daniel 7. Dominion over the nations. All languages and peoples will worship him. That was the goal. Christianity fulfilled that, because both Christianity and Islam, and this isn't my opinion, this is like the consensus view, even in Orthodox Judaism, and the top rabbi in all of Judaism, Maimonides, say this.
So do you think that stems back to when you say it's a scam, or what the word you use there, the prophecy, like the fulfillment of prophecy,
Deception,
manipulation,
fake prophecy
deception.
fulfillment.
Yeah.
Basically,
So
they had all the prophecies of the Old Testament, and they're searching them for mysteries. They're connecting different passages. They're having mystical, ascension-like, dream-like experiences while they're thinking about these. So they're looking for mysteries to be revealed in the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures, about their redemption, about their Messiah. And basically, Paul, all of the earliest texts of the New Testament are Paul's epistles. And he never knew Jesus, and he explicitly says he saw him in visions and in the Old Testament scriptures. So what they were doing is they created a Bible code fan fiction, like mythical story, fulfilling all of these prophecies. The word became flesh. That means the Torah became flesh. You read what Paul says, everything's according to the scriptures. It's all this prophecy is fulfilled. Same with Mark, the first gospel, complete symbolic fiction of this prophecy Messiah that's a mythical figure. But what did it do? It got all of the nations to abandon their idol worship and worship the God of Israel and the quote-unquote king of the Jews, the Davidic dictator that's meant to have every knee in the world bow to him. That's the right. Every knee will bow. Candace Owens, right?
Right. So what's interesting to me, and this is what I was going to ask, is that so if your point is that it's a manipulation at the beginning, are you arguing that means that they didn't believe this, wherever this stemmed from, that it was ultimately a lie, that they weren't believing in the religion, or that is that what you're saying? That's interesting. So flesh that out.
This is a great question. You're a smart dude.
Thank you.
It's the key question. I think initially it was ancient Jews that were like maybe on the fringes, Essene, Qumran, Ebionites, James and Paul type of sects, and they saw that the chances of a political Messiah coming was grim, right? So instead they envisioned a spiritual victory with a cosmic Messiah in the heavenly realm. And they learned about this by obsessively reading all the scriptures and reading them out of context, and they can mean whatever they want esoterically with their creative, cleverly devised myths that they did. And they could have sincerely believed it. Look at all the prophets today on the internet that go, look at what this scripture prophecy means right here, and I had a dream and Jesus told me this. That's the same type of stuff that was going on back then. Paul never knew Jesus, but yet the earliest source of the Lord's Supper is from Paul, and he says he learned it from revelation, not from an eyewitness. He wasn't there. He got it from revelation. Paul also says that he was caught up into the third heaven where he learned the mysteries of God. This ascension is like Merkava mysticism, chariot mysticism that later turned into like Kabbalah, mystical Kabbalah, right? Coming up with these stories and having these dreams and visions. And that's how Christianity started, from scripture and visions.
See, this is really, I'd almost like to just spend the rest of the discussion talking about this at the last part about the overlap. To your point about interrogating all of the Abrahamic religion. So what you just said there is really fascinating, because I'm always, this is one of the reasons why I am very resistant to organized religion. And I don't criticize people that want to practice their beliefs in a place, in a church and so on. But my issue is that I feel that there's a lot of manipulation, right? That these are people, like, nobody needs to look further than some of these large, what's the right word for him? What's that guy's name that owns like 40 jets and has like 1,000? He's a Christian guy that does he preaches, and he's like the most famous, like big church guy.
I forget his name. Which one?
Yeah, exactly my point, right? So there's so many of them. My point is that I find organized religion to be very manipulative for any of them, quite frankly. And so going back to the earliest point, if you're arguing that it seems it kind of began that way, this is kind of what you were just highlighting. You can see this now coming full circle today, right? Where you've got the clear, on the surface, the Israeli Zionist Jewish kind of push about this being that, even the prophecies coming out, but you also have interestingly, for a lot longer than that I'm even thinking about right now, U.S. politicians who have basically, and not even basically, blatantly said, God told me to run for office, or that I speak to God. There's more than one politician that have said things just like that. So in your first question, and then let's get into why you think all these are interestingly worthy of investigation. Do you think that this is an effort to sort of blend this back into like the political conversation? Like you said in the beginning, they went with the religious text because the political side of it was more difficult. Like if I'm sussing that out correctly, do you think this is an effort to kind of bring that back into it? To now we've got these, zealots on the pulpits out there for politics that are folding in the religion into it. Is that what you see happening?
Look at our American politics, like all the top Republicans that Trump surrounded himself with, right? Pompeo, right. He's like a rapture fanatic, close friends with Kufi, Christians United for Israel, and John Hagee. Same with Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, Pence, Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley had John Hagee at her presidential announcement. John Hagee's got this book, Earth's Last Empire, with the eagle that represents Edom in America, obviously. His Christian buddy, another top influential Christian in the country, Rabbi Jonathan Cahn. Also, I have clips of him saying America has to fall in the end times. America has to fall in a war and be destroyed. And John Hagee was in Trump's prayer group. He was up on the stage with Trump when he signed the executive order incorporating the anti-Semitism definition.
How does this make sense to Republicans? I don't even understand that. They must know about some of this stuff. Like, how does it make sense to them to support Trump's cabinet who actively have discussions about destroying America? I find that,
what percentage of the Republicans are Christian?
It's a good question. More so than Zionists, you mean?
Well, they're all Zionists. Every Christian at the end of the day is really a Zionist because they worship the God of Zion. The God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He dwells in Zion. Zion is his holy mountain. The law will come forth from Zion. It is the God of Zion, which really just means Jerusalem.
But here's an interesting point, though, because I'm a Christian, right? I don't believe I'm a Zionist. You're saying that I am, even though I don't know that or think that?
Well, what do you mean by you're not a Zionist? Do you believe in Zionism? Do you believe in the concept of Zion, the God of Zion?
No, I don't believe in the religious side of that conversation. I don't believe in, at least maybe I don't understand that I do. I believe in Christianity, and I believe in the Bible, and I believe in these in a abstract metaphorical sense, to be very clear.
So where is the Holy Land in your belief?
Well, but see, this is getting, I'm not a organized practicing Christian where I'm going. I'm not, you know what I mean? I read the Bible when I was a kid.
Zion and Jerusalem was ever God's holy land?
Well, I believe that this is where it gets into what I think are metaphorical, historical overlaps that we tend to, I don't know. I believe that there's a lot that's written. Like, for interesting example, I just saw Naftali Bennett claiming that because the Bible discusses these histories, that's how we know it's true. And I'm like, well, why in the world do we pretend we can prove any of these 3,000-year-old statements or, pointing back to something 3,000 years ago? So that's what I would say. I believe if that there's under biblical and other religious points about those locations. I don't know. Is Bethlehem actually where Jesus was born? Is that all metaphor? I don't know. It's like I believe in a lot of these things from a point of faith, but that's why I wouldn't want to interrogate publicly, because it's not something I can prove. Like, this is where, you could probably sense reluctance for me even to go into this stuff, because it's not because I don't want to talk about it. If I wanted to have a conversation about my belief, my faith, I'll do it all day long. But it's important to me when we're talking about things from a news factual base that I don't overlap that, like I said before. But I'm happy to answer the questions, though. My point would be, I don't believe I'm a Zionist. I don't believe in anything Zionist in anywhere I can see right now projecting. I don't believe in any of the things that they're pushing forward. And I personally find them different than Christianity. But to your point, going back in the history behind it and some of the more extreme levels, there's probably more overlap than I would like. My only point was simply that I don't think, just to say that Christianity is Zionism, again, that's a broad stroke that I would argue there's more nuance to, which I bet you would flesh out if we really went into it more deeper. I would argue probably, right?
Exactly. Well, hearing you talk, I'm
not to put words in your mouth, but I just, based on what we've said already.
So do you think that Judaism was the one true religion before Christianity started, and they were worshiping the one true God?
Again, these are things that I would defer to your work on the historical context of it, because I haven't gone that deep on this stuff. But my point would be that I think it's quite sort of irrelevant when it comes to the non-religious perspective of this stuff today, like from a news-based perspective. Like, I bet you could ask any number of Zionists, Jews, and Christians, and they would all, like you just pointed out, they'd all have different opinions on that stuff, like slightly differing perspectives on what is and isn't true, So I just find it really hard to break down those opinions as if it is relevant to the larger point we're making today,
John Hagee and Tim LaHaye. Tim LaHaye is the author of the Left Behind series about the rapture. He founded the Council for National Policy. It's a influential right-wing Christian group, political group, and with a lot of top names around Trump involved with the Council for National Policy. Tim LaHaye authored Left Behind. Both him and John Hagee and all these top influential Christians are saying that Gog and Magog, the end times war, it's Iran and Russia, and some of them say China as well, in war versus America in the end times. It's called the birth pangs of the Moshiach. Wars, plagues, famines, earthquakes, and it's birth pangs because the closer they get to their redemption in the Messiah and the Messianic age, it's like a woman giving birth. It gets more painful contractions closer together. That's what they envision for the end times.
Well, how do you overlap that with something you pointed out a lot in the past in regard to the Russian overlap with these same conversations? So like this would be the point. So from like a prophecy perspective, if it's supposed to be Iran and Russia kind of verse what we're talking about, isn't there a very clear overlap with this same ideology in Russia? That's something I think you've covered a lot in the past, right?
Yeah, actually, the Russian Orthodox Church has been playing right into the Kabbalah dialectic that the West is antichrist and satanic. And in Kabbalah, rabbis view the West as Edom, and Edom is the descendants of Esau, the evil, wicked twin brother of Jacob, who is the descendants, the Jewish people are the descendants of Jacob. This is what they believe. So the Edomites is Rome, became Christianity. It's Esau, and in Kabbalah they view Christianity as satanic, and the West is satanic because the guardian angel of Esau is Satan or Samael. So they view us as they view Christianity as satanic idol worship, but also a step in the right direction of getting rid of paganism and other gods and worshiping the God of Israel.
Right. Just to clear, when I say it's ridiculous, it's just ridiculous that not in the sense that like that the overlap, like that Biden is a Christian Zionist and like this partnership between like, these ultra orthodox, like religious Republicans that believe deeply in Christianity, acting like they have some kind of reverence to Israel, while you can clearly see like an open hatred towards Christianity from a lot of these conversations. Like, how do you make sense of that? Like, how does it that they don't see that?
Most Christians do see it, but they don't see all of it, but they're okay with it because according to the Christian story, it's like the Jews are supposed to reject Jesus. The prophecy dictated that they had to reject Jesus. Without that, there would be no Christianity. So a lot of Christians kind of get off on the idea, and it's like, so to go back to your question earlier of like how did it initially develop, I think it started just as a Jewish sect that envisioned a celestial cosmic savior that suffered and died as an atonement for sins, so they didn't need the temple anymore. That's
a manipulation you're saying, though, right? So they didn't believe this was a lie from the beginning.
Very initially, they could have been sincere believers. It's possible. And then Paul comes along, right? Paul reads the scriptures. He becomes the apostle to the Gentiles. So Christianity is really targeting the Gentile world, is what it's doing. It's not targeting Jews. It's like anti-Jewish. The Jews are meant to reject the Messiah and be hardened and stumble. And Paul cites all the verses in the prophecy where he, constructed all of this. And it's from the prophecies where he sees that the Messiah is to be rejected and die and then go to the Gentiles. And what people will say is there had to be a historical Jesus. He had to be crucified. And then his followers searched the scriptures to prove he was the Messiah. But ancient Judaists were already searching the scriptures, making these connections, even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, about their future Messiah and redemption. And they believed in all type of firmament and seven heavens and angels and demons and fighting in heaven and stuff. This is normal mythical construction. So it started as a myth, and then they historicized it in the Gospels and placed them in history. And it was clearly targeting the Gentiles. The Great Commission, go baptize all the nations. Get the nations to abandon their gods and worship the God of Israel. That's the main goal.
That is some definite foresight right there. So you're arguing that or your perception is that this was a manipulation and possibly believed, but that was so long sought that they were creating the manipulation to get Gentiles to believe in Christianity so it could eventually be toppled for their prophecy to come true. Is that a good?
Well, yeah, the Messiah is meant to conquer all the kings of the world. I can show you many verses straight, like not even open to interpretation, that say that all over the Torah.
Well, that's an interesting overlap to. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, Paul was, as far as we know, Paul was the innovator that took it to the Gentiles, and you can see he shows in the scripture why he thought that's what needed to happen, and it did. A few hundred years later, conquer Rome. And there's actually a story called Toldoth Yeshu, the life of Jesus. It's the Jewish story of Jesus. It's like a secret occult book that they have. And it says that Peter and Paul actually were like double agents, and they saw Christianity as like a heretical sect in Judaism. So they separated and took it to the Gentiles. And it almost made it like an antithesis to Judaism, because they don't follow the law, they don't keep kosher, they don't circumcise. You know, it was very, they consume blood, which is prohibited. They view, it's idolatrous because they view God as a man. All of these things are like, anathema to Judaism. So it's like an inversion of Judaism for the Gentiles, and they oppose each other to a degree. But the Christians believe that they're like chosen, but like cursed, chosen and rejected, right? But they're still central to their religion. And Christianity ultimately just destroyed all the other pagan religions and Islam in Arab countries, Europe, even South America. And so now rabbis like brag about it on the internet that they spiritually took over the world.
It's fascinating. It's like the original conspiracy in a sense. So so what's interesting though is that there's two directions I want to go. We only have about 15 minutes left. So basically, I want to ask about the crisis king conversation, because it's interesting how that is what you just discussed. Now, the king conversation is interesting. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to make sure we did at least point at the same, the other third, the leg of this kind of tripod we're discussing here, which would be Islam, right? And so what you're discussing, let's just put it this way, make it simple to bring it into the current conversation. How do you explain for the audience why this makes sense, that Israel and the United States have provably been funding the most radical elements of this conversation, a lot of which you could prove aren't even true believers of the religion. It's more of a manipulation with Saudi Arabia for terrorism and so on. But how do you make sense of that? Is it because of the same point that this was meant to be kind of destabilized and destroyed for the same reason? Is that what the argument is?
I got several clips of rabbis saying that like all the puzzle pieces are in place, and Ishmael versus Esau, Islam versus Christianity,
Oh, that's right. You already said that. That's right. Okay.
Right. And how they're in the middle of it, and then they're going to like mutually destroy each other, and then the Israel is going to survive. That's kind of the sentiment. That's what Gog and Magog is, straight from the Chabad's website. That's what it says. Gog and Magog is Ishmael and Esau, war against each other. And fitting that it's like two offshoots of Judaism are pinned against each other, even though they basically believe most of the same things. In Islam, they view Jesus as a prophet and even a messianic figure that is going to return in the end times to defeat the Dajjal, the Antichrist figure.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels, and so it's interesting is right now, to bring this forward to people that are, maybe for some reason can't see what's going on in the world, that you're literally watching Israel drive these two pieces together, right? Whether or not you believe the discussion right now and what, which I think is a lot of historical proof to what he's discussing, it's clear that this is actually happening, right? You can see Israel driving the regional war, driving the Middle East conversation, basically right up against the United States, right? I mean, so is that what you think is happening? Is that what you think is playing out?
Israel's about to get us in war with Iran, and very easily that could escalate to Russia and China as well. And then, everything that these rabbis and Christian Zionists have been fantasizing about is going to unfold. And it's amazing that I think Trump and Kushner are going to get back in and be in the position to do it. And there's a lot of rabbis that are saying that Trump is like this messianic figure of Edom. They say he's the Messiah of Edom. And the Messiah of Edom in Isaiah 63 destroys Edom, oversees the destruction of Edom. So Trump gets back into office. We got the war of sons of light and sons of darkness, Gog and Magog. We got maybe Trump and Kushner still trying to have some peace type of thing going on. Maybe we'll see the destruction of the dome, because I think these religious fanatics, these zealots there's no question, they're trying to fulfill their prophecies. It's like a script, a blueprint, a plan for, dominion over the nations.
Right.
The
Right.
one world government, one world religion is what it is.
Right.
And it's funny because Christians will be like, we're against the one world government, one world religion. But ultimately, they also want the Torah Messiah, Davidic dictator to rule over all the nations. As long as his name is Jesus, they're okay with it.
It's just so interesting. You know, the overlap. I mean, what you can see clearly is that this is something that is being engineered, right? And I think what's important for the average person who may be reflexively dismissive of just about anything today, there's far too many out there, is what I've often said is that whether or not, like I make the same argument with more like occult conversations. And I guess you could even argue there's an overlap here clearly, but the idea being that whether or not you believe out there watching that these things are real, the question for me is always whether they believe they're real, right? Whether the religious Zionism party is going to act of this belief, whether or not you think it's real. That's a terrifying thing for me, you know, and we're watching the altar built. We're watching the red heifers get rolled out. We're watching all this stuff right in front of us. And yet it still gets dismissed as something that I just don't know how that's even possible. I mean, other than we're seeing so many other lies get suppressed in every other way, you know? So I think that's very clear. I think what you described today is just undeniably obvious. Whether or not people out there believe the historical side of it, it's obvious that this has come to fruition and it's playing out. And that terrifies me. So let's end with the point. And by the way, I'd love to come talk about more about this with you in the future, because I think there's plenty of other things we can interrogate. But let's talk about the whole Candace Owens, Christ is King, daily, you know, that whole thing at the end that kind of, which really stood out to me when it was happening. Like this idea that you saw this clear division between, you know, even from within the Daily Wire, which was interesting, like where they broke off and it's like this whole group screaming Christ is King and making this point. If you don't say it like this, then you're not part of that. Like this clear division, you know, explain that for the audience that didn't understand what that was and why that connects with our conversation today.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how when Christians say Christ is King, what they're really saying is Christ is the Moshiach, the anointed one. That's what christened means, the anointed. That's what Moshiach means, the anointed one. In the Torah, the anointed ones, the Moshiachs, were the high priest and the kings. So Jesus is in Christianity is like a blend of both. But when they say Christ is King, they're saying Moshiach is the King of the Jews. That's who the King David was. The Messiah is meant to be the branch, the seed of David, King David of Judah, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who comes to conquer all the nations in the end times. That's what he's supposed to do, and have all the nations worship the God of Israel. But so Christians look like the villains in the media now, being mean and persecuting the Jews. When they say every knee will bow and Christ is King, they go, oh, Candace Owens is being anti-Semitic to Ben Shapiro, right? But in reality, rabbis in Judaism also teaches that Christ is King. They say they just say Moshiach is the King of David. It's the same exact thing. They're fighting over who is the Jewish Messiah. It's like just two Jewish sects having like an intra-sect squabble over who the Messiah is. And that right there is just like a controlled game, right? It's a limited hangout because it's like the rest of us are like, who cares about who your Messiah is, right? But Christianity largely online, in conspiracy genres, in right-wing, Christianity dominates the whole dialectic between Judaism. Both the majority that's like pro-Zionist, pro-Judaism, you know, cursed if you curse them, blessed if you bless them. But then the so-called anti-Zionist Christians or the anti-Semitic Christians, they play the villains that are scapegoated just by mirroring basically what Judaism does, but reflecting it back on them. And then they're the ones that, you know, because that's the narrative of history, right? Is that the Jews are always been persecuted. The Christians hated them because they killed God. So it gives them the victim status, the sympathy card, the underdog fulfillment of their prophecy that they're hated by the nations. And then now anti-Semites are discredited and look like deranged religious bigots because they're like, you killed God and you're satanic and you need to convert, right? So they're the villains, and it's this is this dynamic, the Judeo paradigm, as I call it. And there's also the whole Abrahamic matrix when you want to include Islam as well.
Oh, I'm sure we could get. I'm sure that would be a whole other conversation, right? We should reconnect and get into more of this. But you know, I think it's a good place to end in general. And I thank you for coming on and explaining a lot of this stuff. You know, I still want to stress that it's important that, you know, consider what Adam is outlining here. Look at his other work. Do your due diligence. Don't jump the gun and just reflexively dismiss anything. Like he said at the beginning, question everything is obviously something that we stand by, right? But I would still argue that I think that there's also some truth to the reality that there is a manipulation of a lot of this from people that arguably might not believe from the very origin point you pointed out what they're actually saying is the end game. And it's more about trying to manipulate individuals and political dynamics. And, but I do also believe there's a very clear element of this that seem to blindly believe what's happening here. I just caution skepticism in every direction. I think broad stroking any one group is a dangerous thing to do. And I think it is ultimately ignorance because you can see that it's not everything. And I think that's an important thing to include. But again, open mind, research this stuff. And I plan on reconnecting with Adam again so we can go further on some of these interesting discussions. I really appreciate your work, man, because there's so many people that, whether or not I agree with everything, there's so many people that are just terrified to even step into this. And it's sort of like anything else we've discussed over the years, the anti-Semitism point I made at the beginning, that you just can't even ask the questions, or as simple as saying the government of Israel committed a crime. Oh my God, you hate Jewish people. And it's just like, it's become such a parody of itself, and I think that is, you deserve credit for having the courage to break these things down for people at a wildly more contentious time this day. So thanks for coming on, and looking forward to connecting soon. Anything else you want to leave us on the way out, upcoming work or any last notes?
Sure. Appreciate you for having me on. I was happy to do it. I enjoyed it. And it's like we have to question everything. And that definitely includes the major religious institutions of the last 2,000 years that have been ubiquitous in our societies and dominated more than any other thing. The greatest story ever told, the most printed book, most translated book ever. And the Christ is king, every knee will bow. That every knee will bow is from Isaiah 45. And it means all of the nations of the world will bow to the Messiah. That's what it ultimately means. And I appreciate you so much because this is highly controversial. I know I went through this myself. I had a lot of Christian followers, and you start researching Jesus mythicism and origins of Christianity and secrets in Judaism, and I came to these conclusions, and I lost a lot of Christian supporters. And you're taking a huge risk because the Christians act like a zealot mob. They're going to be calling us Mossad agents. They're going to be lying and saying that we're Jewish like we always do. They're going to call you Antichrist. They're going to threaten to pull support. This is what they do, and this is how they dominate and monopolize all the opposition to Zionism and keep it on the kosher plantation where you're just you're opposed to them supposedly, but you worship their God, believe their holy book, believe in their covenant, worship, bow down to the Messiah, their Messiah, right? The God of Israel. So it's not real opposition. I appreciate you for taking the risk, and I'm happy to talk again. We should do it again. Or maybe I'll have you on. We can just cover news too, because I remember that's what we used to do back in the day, is bang out all the news. It was cool.
Yeah, I'd love to, man. Yeah, looking forward to it. And we'll definitely connect again. So thank you for your work, man. And I look forward to talking in the future. And as always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.